This show is sponsored by Sevi, answering all your commercial real estate needs. Sevi is the first commercial real estate company committed to the 4 C's: commercial real estate, community, content, and culture. Go visit Sevi at Sevi, S-E-V-I, properties.com. Again, SeviProperties.com. Hello everyone, welcome to the DMV Business Show. I'm your host, Otto Sevilla, and today I have a very special guest for you. I'm really excited to share with you Marla Bilonick, and Marla is the President and CEO of NALCAB. NALCAB is the National Association for Latino Community Asset Builders, and she's a seasoned veteran in the community building, economic building for the Latino community here locally in the DMV and also abroad. Marla, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Of course, the pleasure is all mine. Before we go into your personal and business journey, I'd like the audience to get to know NALCAB, just in case they haven't heard of them. They're like, what is that? What do they do? What do they stand for?
Absolutely. So as you said, NALCAB is the National Association for Latino Community Asset Builders, and we are a network of organizations, all nonprofits working in the economic development space, and all with the shared mission of advancing economic mobility for Latinos in the U.S. So I know we'll get into this later, but the organization that I used to lead here in D.C. is a member. So if you could imagine, 200 community-based organizations very similar to LADC, who your listeners may be familiar with, that are doing work with first-time home buyers, aspiring business owners, existing business owners, working to both launch, grow, and expand economic opportunities, but also to help keep folks from being displaced, businesses from being displaced. But again, it's all in this economic development field. And what, I had worked, to your point, my whole career with entrepreneurs. My customers now are nonprofit organizations, which are very similar to small businesses. So the skill set is more or less the same. It's just a different animal.
I love that. So you said you have over 200 nonprofit members?
Yes, we do. And most of them are actually also lenders. So a great part of them are community development financial institutions, and then others are just community-based lenders that operate without that certification.
And they're all over the U.S.?
All over the U.S., everywhere that Latinos are, and places that you might be surprised to know that Latinos are, like Hawaii or, Washington State. We're everywhere.
We are everywhere, yes. So are you originally from the DMV area?
Yes and no. So I was born in Panama, but I came here around 3 years old. So really, this area has been my home. I grew up in Montgomery County, went to all the local, public schools, graduated from Bethesda Chevy Chase High School, where actually one of my children has graduated so far. So yeah, I guess this is my hometown, DC area.
Nice. What part of Panama are you from?
The city.
The city, okay.
Yeah.
Do you still have family back there?
I do. My dad had lived there. My parents were divorced, and my dad lived there, for probably the last, I want to say, 20 years of his life. He passed away in 2020. And he had been back and forth between the states. He lived in Miami for some time, but sort of in his older years, he was living back in Panama. And I was actually just there last month with my siblings, all 5. So
Nice.
we made it happen, and it was a great time together. And it was the first time that we all went together to visit his grave because of COVID. We weren't able to all, get there. And so it was really a beautiful time.
That's great. Do you go there often, or it had been a while since you went?
Yeah, it had been a while because I typically went, with the specific purpose of visiting my dad. So,
Okay.
Once he was gone, and as you know, like the whole COVID period, which I guess is over. I don't want to speak too soon, but, it just made everything more difficult with regard to travel and, all of that. But I'm glad we were able to make it happen this year.
That's great. I have not gone to Panama City, but I want to. I was born in Nicaragua. I'm from Nicaragua.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
Just like you, I came here at a very young age, actually much younger than 3 years old. So,
Oh,
but
wow.
to DC. So I grew up also here in this area as well.
Oh, that's great.
Coming here at such a young age, at 3 years old, to Maryland, You know, I'm sure it was a culture shock for both you and your parents. How was that for you?
Well, I mean, I don't remember it at all. And what I will say is that, and I'm so happy that like my parents were very intent on me keeping my Spanish. And so I actually went, there is a school here in Montgomery County called Rock Creek Forest Elementary School that is a Spanish immersion program. And so once I started in school, I was really, doing everything in Spanish to begin with. Then I transferred to an English only elementary school in third grade and struggled a little bit, but everything sort of worked itself out. And so I'm so happy to have sort of both best of both worlds. I've certainly written and read more in English, so I won't be putting out a novel in Spanish anytime soon. But as far as talking and getting a point across and connecting, that all comes together.
Sure.
So I'm so happy about that.
But at home growing up, main language was Spanish or?
No, so my mom is from Connecticut. She's
Oh, okay.
just a regular white lady.
Yeah.
So I'm mixed. And they actually met in college. And my mom, both of my parents lived in Panama for several years before I was born. And maybe, would have stayed there in perpetuity, but we ended up coming here for a job opportunity for my dad.
Okay, I
Yeah,
understand. So you said you graduated from BCC, and
I did.
then upon graduation, did you have an idea, an inclination as far as where your interests, what you wanted to do?
I wish I could say, or maybe I don't. I mean, life sort of takes you on a path. I definitely, graduating from high school, had no idea what I wanted to do. I mean, maybe a little bit. I think growing up in the DC area, um, you get exposed to so much around politics. So my major was political science, but I don't really know too many practical applications for that unless are going to go directly into politics. But even then, it's more theoretical, so it doesn't really sort of have a direct path into any career. Um, but when I went to graduate school, I thought I knew what I wanted to do, which is something completely and totally different than what I ended up doing. Although I did kind of stumble into it during graduate school, so I can kind of explain that if that's useful.
Yeah,
Or
definitely.
yeah. So when I went, the year between college and college and graduate
Grad
school,
school.
I worked for a very prestigious family as their nanny. And during the day, while their child was at school, I had an internship at the Brookings Institution, and I was working with a visiting fellow from the European Commission. And so, what I thought I wanted to do was more around like international trade and regulations around that. So I ended up going to an international program that is based here in DC. It's Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, or SICE. And in that program, I learned about microfinance, which is basically doing small loans to individuals or entrepreneurs internationally. And I had the benefit of having two of basically the biggest pioneers in the field internationally as my professors for a class that was called Microfinance and Development. And I was hooked. So from there, that has been like the thread throughout my entire career has been sort of this focus on entrepreneurs. I was able to, do it in Latin America. I can talk about that too. But basically that class was the beginning of the whole thing.
Hmm.
So it was amazing, but I had to quickly shift all my studies to move in that direction once I realized that's what I wanted to do.
That's great. Once you were done with grad school, did you go to maybe a global organization? You were able to go to Latin America and travel and do
Yeah,
microfinance?
so eventually I did, but sort of an interesting maybe foreshadowing is that the very first job I had out of graduate school was at the Latino Economic Development Center in DC, LEDC. Um, At the time, it was an 11-person organization in Adams Morgan, which is where I happened to be living at the time. And I knew I wanted to go into this field, but because, as I mentioned, my only sort of office job that I had had up until that point, or a practical job, was this internship that ended up not really being relevant. So um, I ended up working at LADC because I wanted to do something in micro lending, and I had never done any lending of any sort, like in a true practical way. I understood it kind of as a concept, but I hadn't ever lent a dollar to anybody. So I worked there. I was actually a loan specialist, but I basically was an entire lending department in one person, as many nonprofits do, especially smaller ones. So I was, sourcing the deals, which at that time meant like physically door knocking, around the neighborhood, doing sort of the underwriting of the deal, presenting it to committee. And then I also did the collections piece. I always say like I did the bills. So like I knew how to fold the piece of paper so the address would be in the plastic window. This is back in like the days when computers were, this big, and it was very low tech, very analog. But and it was also very cool because the businesses were all in a neighborhood. So, you could see a business that started because of you, or you could, walk into a place and you knew the owner and they, could tell you about how it's going. And it also worked well for collections because, since I lived in the neighborhood where I worked, and people knew that they would run into me eventually. So I hope it was an incentive for them to pay their loans back on time. Not that I was like an intimidating anything, but still, just knowing that you have to sort of run into your debtor is probably some incentive. So that was my first job. And then once I had built some lending chops there, I did go work for a big international USAID contractor. They do all kinds of contracting actually, but USAID was their primary client. And so I did get to go. I went to Nicaragua, actually, Mexico, Colombia, Costa Rica, Panama. I was all over. My two main projects that I supported were in El Salvador and Bolivia, in La Paz. So those were the two places that I was traveling the most. But I also got to see, so many other places, and it was really, really a great experience.
That's beautiful. And I know eventually you went back to LADC too, right?
I did. So I had kind of a strange career up until NALCAB that I worked everywhere except for the one that was in the middle twice. So I worked at LADC, then I worked at this firm that's called DAI. Then I was in New York for several years, and I worked for a nonprofit there for the entire time that I was there, which ended up being around 7 years. Then I came back to DAI and then back to LADC. So I had sort of done it backwards and forwards. And when I came back to LADC, I was running their small business program, and the executive director at the time left, and it sort of kicked off a very tumultuous period for LADC. In the span of 12 months, we had 4 different executive directors that ended with me as the sort of last of those 4. And so I was in this sort of interim role, and then just converted to permanent, and was there for the greater part of the last decade. And then I came to NALCAB.
Oh, that's great. And LADC, you mentioned earlier, Marla, you basically, in the beginning, when you first started out of grad school, you were doing a lot of things, like from sourcing,
Yes.
till knocking on doors with a bat. I'm
Yes.
joking, not with a bat, but
Well, I was also knocking on doors to see if people wanted loans. So not only, to be the bearer of bad news, but also, to kind of get people, aware of the services that we provided. Yeah.
No, but that's amazing that you saw everything from the very beginning to getting the customer per se, right, to the end, and eventually they would pay it off, the loan, right?
Yes. Yeah. And some of the businesses are still around. So it's very cool.
I love this because I'm in commercial real estate. So a lot of my clients are especially small, medium-sized businesses, and especially minority based. They're underrepresented out there. And going to the Bank of America, or the major banks here, sometimes it's not feasible for them. So it's fantastic that organizations like this exist, and that's a source for them to go and get capital.
Absolutely. And, I'd say, most small businesses really struggle to get capital at the beginning, and then add on other layers, that include even explicit discrimination. It's really challenging to get financing from a traditional bank, at least within the first 5 years. And then you can also add other factors like, if you're new to the US, and even our culture is not a credit-based culture. So people, who come to the US from other countries, it doesn't mean that they automatically subscribe into this system of like having credit cards and borrowing money. Like that's, a lot of cultures are really just, it's kind of like you have what you have and that's what you spend, and you don't, there's sort of nothing outside of that. And so part of it is a cultural shift of sort of figuring out that you have to have a credit score to really do anything in this country. And so, something that LEDC does, but it's also a hindrance for folks to get financing through banks if they are sort of newer arrivals, is this credit building piece. So, I think oftentimes the assumption is that people have poor credit, but a lot of the times it's just that you have no credit. And many of us start our credit sort of track record with student loans. So even if you didn't even get a credit card, like you have something to show that, yes, over time you've been able to pay regularly, but that's not the case for everyone. And then of course, also sometimes people do get into trouble. One extraneous, extraordinary event can happen that can throw your credit off, and then you're kind of out for a while when it comes to traditional financing. And I think that's what microlenders are really good at, is looking at the whole picture, understanding, the person and their circumstance, and not just sort of having a really rigid, kind of black and white credit box, which is what banks do.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you mentioned this, because I was going to ask you next, as far as the guidelines and certain underwriter requirements compared to a larger bank or going to a micro lender.
Yeah. So oftentimes, I won't say all, because some, community development financial institutions or other community lenders do use credit score. Certainly, if they do, it's not going to be the overarching, case of how they're going to do, rate their deal. But typically, microlenders are looking at, or even, not microlenders, lenders in the community that are doing even larger loans, are, as I mentioned, looking at the entire picture. So they'll have, they'll typically have developed a relationship with the potential borrower before a loan is dispersed. So there's a sort of a different level of trust, a different level of transparency. They'll understand sort of, if they're looking at something on paper, they'll understand all of the context for why it is or is not in a certain way. And oftentimes too, the requirements of an application aren't necessarily that straightforward either. So like if you need to have a profit and loss statement, you might not have organized your finances that way. You might not have had QuickBooks or something that would spit out a report like that. So a lot of what microlenders do too in the underwriting process is a form of technical assistance or consulting that's really sort of helping you develop the documents. For startups, sometimes a loan officer will create, a whole year out of projections, based on information that's just from talking to an entrepreneur, sort of like, okay, is there seasonality to your business? Like, are there certain months where you sell more and less? Or, just sort of asking the right questions to be able to put on paper what a lender is going to need to see, whether that's a community-based lender or even ultimately a bank lender is going to ask for documentation that if you don't have it, that's sort of the end of the story. In a community lender situation, they're going to actually take you through all of it. And another thing too, is, I remember when I worked directly with small businesses, we always tell folks to sort of report every single, sale that they make. But, something that also happens is that sometimes people don't report everything. And so a lender will actually look at like, sort of, let's talk about what the real cash intake of your business was, because that actually gives you the ability to borrow even more if we're talking about sort of the real picture of what's going on. So, it's a lot of that is just sort of like really taking each deal as a unique and individualized bespoke transaction, rather than kind of like, if your credit score isn't this, and if your sales aren't this, and if your profit margins aren't this, like that's the end of the story. So, it's very intense, and it's very, labor heavy on the part of the organization. And that's also part of why banks would never do it. Like it's not worth it. By the time you're at the end of the deal, you've already expended, so much that it's not really a cost effective from the business standpoint of a bank, So for all of those reasons, community lenders really fill a big gap that is left by traditional banking system.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. It just reminds me of a conversation I was having with a client recently who was opening her first location, and her business was started all online, and she was doing great.
Yeah.
But she was then saying, Otto, but a lot of it's cash. As you know, a lot of minorities, especially
Yeah.
Latinos,
Yeah.
like to deal with cash and might not
Yeah.
report everything to the government. And I'm like, look, typically landlords ask for 2 to 3 years of tax returns for a
Yeah.
business if it's an established business. And
Mhm.
she was like, yeah, maybe I might not be reporting everything.
Right.
So luckily, this landlord was open-minded, and we were able to use sort of Square or just the
Right. That's
transactions coming
yeah.
in, so they
Yeah.
can see the volume that she was doing.
Yeah. And I do want to say this is not unique to Latinos. I'm not saying like because you're Latino, you didn't report. Like
Of course,
absolutely.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So I just wanted to make that clear. I think it happens for a lot of reasons, and most of them are not nefarious, but it's just, it could even be like a lack of proper recording to know what you brought in to accurately report on your taxes. But anyhow, I've seen it across communities. I've seen it across, every way you can slice demographically. So, and certainly, I mean, we can say we know that the people are on the other end of the spectrum of wealth are also finding, ways to hide income. So it's certainly a universal thing.
Yes, yes, no,
Yeah.
completely. Yes. With LEDC, I'm
Yeah,
curious because if you're a startup, do they also lend to startups, or is it someone already
we
with an
do.
established? Okay.
We do. And most community lenders will lend to startups. So that's kind of another gap. Regardless of who you are, most banks won't give startup capital. It's just too risky. You're really betting on an idea. Regardless of how well planned out it is, it's still a huge risk. But at the same time, most of the people in our community don't have necessarily, the wealthy aunt or the wealthy uncle or, someone who's going to be that startup capital for you. I mean, it's just not there. And so that's a very important role that community lenders play in the sense that they're able to give that startup capital that might not be available elsewhere to plenty of people who have incredible ideas that are so like needed and successful and ultimately become the livelihood for the business owner, the people they hire, have a positive impact in their community. It's really the domino effect of a successful small business is huge.
Yeah. What made you transition from LEDC to now NALCAB?
So LEDC has been a member of NALCAB for, as long as I was at LEDC. And the founding executive director actually took a job in the Biden administration. And at that time, I was on the board of NALCAB. And, he really encouraged me to apply. And, it was a really tough even to just apply, because I sort of felt like I'm not going to apply if I'm not going to sort of take it all the way and see what happens. And so it was a really tough decision because I did and still do feel very attached to LEDC. Like I just, it has such a special place in my heart. The people, the clients, the communities, because as LEDC is now a regional organization and actually also has offices in Puerto Rico. So it's grown a lot. But, I sort of felt like it's either I'm going to work at LEDC for the rest of my career, or like this will be the opportunity to do, one or maybe two more things, before I'm done. So, because I don't like to work for a short time anywhere. I always work, or I come back, so it's, so I really felt super committed to LEDC and it was, tough. But I also knew that there were so many talented people at LEDC that they would be just fine without me. And someone from within became the next executive director or CEO. Her name is Emmy Reyes. She's actually now on my board of NALCAB, but she's fantastic, and she's taken it to even further heights. The last count I had, LADC has over 100 employees now, so it's pretty amazing, and the growth that the organization has enjoyed. I got to see it through a phase of growth, and Emmy has now taken it to the next level. And as I mentioned, when I started there in 1999, I should say, it was only 11 people. So, it's sort of 10x where it was back then. So it's pretty amazing, the growth that the organization has had. And I am so happy to have been a small part of one period of LADC's many chapters.
Yeah, that's a lot of growth.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure.
Marla, you have such a rich career. What would you say you're most proud of thus far in your career?
Oh, goodness. I think in every job that I've had, at least I can say that there's something that I have done in every job that I've had that positively impacted at least one person's life and hopefully multiple people's lives. And so, sometimes we talk about wealth building and, closing the racial wealth gap and that sort of thing. But to me, it's even more than, building wealth or financial security. It's really about agency and being able to be at a place financially where you're in the driver's seat. You are able to make decisions for yourself and your family instead of being in this like really tense, place where it's kind of like, okay, I'm not going to pay this bill so that I can pay this bill. And then once that bill catches up to me, I'm going to push off this bill. It's just an incredibly stressful and insecure way to live. And I think if anything that I have done has allowed people to kind of break out of that way of living and go into a different, way that doesn't have to be a way that I'm deciding, but that is what they want for their lives, what they want to do, then that has been like a total success in my eye. And I can think of specific clients, that had again, a special place in my heart that like, I'm so happy that I got to, positively impact their lives with my work. But I just think, whether it's an organization that I was a part of or me personally, or a project overseas that I was a part of, or even, with NALCAB, what's interesting about NALCAB is, as I mentioned, my customers had always been small business owners, but I had never run a small business. Now I'm working with individuals who are running nonprofits, and that's a story that I know, inside and out. So I feel privileged and qualified to be in this role where we're kind of developing programming and advising organizations and helping them through. We ourselves are a community development financial institution, so we lend to nonprofits as well. And so, even just thinking up products that would be useful, I feel like I'm informed by the experiences that I've had, to say like, this is a real need and no one else is, doing this kind of alone or what have you. So that I feel very much like in my purpose in this current job. But I've been lucky to have amazing jobs, amazing people that I've worked with, so I definitely count myself as lucky for all of them. And I couldn't pick just one thing that is like the shining accomplishment. I do have one thing that is like a thing, but I don't even know that it's like for me the most fulfilling. But in 2022, I was named the first Latina or Latino, so first Latinx person to ever chair the Community Development Advisory Board for the Treasury's Department. The Treasury's CDFI fund, which is the Community Development Financial Institution Fund, has a Community Development Advisory Board. And it's been around for about 30 years, and it's never had a Latino or Latina chair of that board. So I was the first, and I was only the second, and still am only the second female chair. So that's like the biggest sort of deal that I've been involved with. But I really think if I think back on sort of like what is the the best thing of my career. It's really just like these moments, like a day or a time or a meeting or, with a person. That's really sort of been the highlight for sure.
Yeah, no, but that's amazing being appointed that position, especially out of, you said 30 years, the first Latina to ever
Yeah.
hold something like
Or
that.
Latino. Yeah.
Or Latina, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the part that, because I would have thought, even if you could accept that, a female wouldn't be the position, but you would have thought over time, if community development financial institutions are intended to serve, you know, BIPOC communities, low-income communities, you would have thought that by now there would have been someone, who was Latino or Latina being in that role.
Hmm.
So it's feels great, but it's also kind of sad, actually, if you think about it, that it took that long. But there's got to be a first for everything, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Marla, you were just mentioning NALCAB and some of the
yeah,
programs. So does NALCAB also develop their own program, or is it more advising or more of a helping role with
yeah.
the members there?
So I can tell you sort of exactly the ways that we intervene with our members. So I call it the 4 C's. So we have sort of 4 core areas of intervention. So the first is capital. As I mentioned, we ourselves are a community development financial institution intermediary, which means that we do institutional lending to other nonprofits. And so that's one way that we get capital into our members' hands. But we also do a lot of grant making. So we have funders that will give us kind of a large lump sum that we'll disseminate among our members for various reasons. Could be that they're all working on a certain technical area, or they're facing a similar challenge, and we'll form sort of cohorts that get grants all together at once. So that's capital. The second way that we work with our members is through capacity building. So we do a lot of technical assistance. It can be one-on-one with an organization. It can be, again, in a cohort. We do a lot of leadership development. So we have over 13 years running an emerging leaders program that's called the Pete Garcia Fellowship. And we just launched last year a sort of parallel program for CEOs that's in partnership with GW. That's called Latino Advancement and Executive Development Program, or LEAD. And so that's sort of part of our capacity building, is building either the next or existing leaders within our network. So I have said capital, capacity building. The third way that we work with our members is by providing them a collective voice. So we do a lot of advocacy work. We have a policy team here in DC where I sit that does a lot of work at the federal level, does a lot of work helping our members to engage in their local political scene, which I don't know how much involvement you've had with, testifying at City Hall or at the, Montgomery County. But I remember when I first started working at the community level, I didn't know that you could, if there was something that you cared about in your local government, that anybody can go and testify. It's a skill. There is a process to it. But, I grew up almost my whole life in Montgomery County. I didn't know that I could do that, and so that was something that, when I was at LADC, we did it a lot on behalf of the work that was important to us. But a lot of our member organizations just haven't sort of developed that muscle. So we'll do work with them to sort of say, okay, this is the process. Like, there's going to be a hearing, and you need to prepare a testimony, and you need to bring copies of the testimony so that all the council members can have it in front of them when you're testifying, and, show up 15 minutes early, or just whatever the process is, depending on where it is. But, so I kind of went off on a tangent there, but that's kind of the work that we're doing on Collective Voice. We do also do a lot of just work with different federal agencies. So the agencies that touch our members' work, like HUD, SBA, which is Small Business Administration. HUD is Housing and Urban Development, Treasury. We do work with Commerce, CFPB, which is Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, really any agency that touches our work. And it's been great to be able to sort of develop, particularly in this administration, a lot of relationships with both the agency heads or the administrators, as well as, key staff. And then the very last thing that we do is we provide our members with comunidad. So we bring our members together for a national conference every year. We have local cafecitos where we bring groups that are working in the same city together. We're working on some more regional convenings, which would bring people from different states, but kind of in a cluster together. So it's really about connecting our members. And that's something, when I was at LADC as a customer of NALCAB's, like I really appreciated the conference so much as just a place where, it's such a narrow group of people that are Latinos working in the economic development space all over the US. And it was just such a cool thing to be a part of. And I think that it still rings true now. That's like one of our biggest things that we bring to our members is the opportunity to get together, to learn from each other, talk about practical and timely things that are going on in our field.
I love that, especially the 4Cs. There's definitely a lot of benefits of being a member of NALCAB.
Well, I think so, but I'm biased. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's unique. It's unique.
Yeah.
It's not a typical kind of association that you would be a part of. It's even though we are 200 plus members, it's a very intimate group of, people, a lot of people who have been working in this field for a long time that have known each other and are kind of like, have been in the trenches for a long time. And then you also have new folks who are just starting out in their career. And it's just such an amazing thing to see everybody together.
You mentioned the program with GW. That's all for members, correct?
It's for members. It's for CEOs of member organizations. So
Okay.
It is a competitive, fellowship. And so we actually had our inaugural group this past year. I think if they haven't finished already, they just finished. And so, or not if they haven't finished already, they will be finishing soon. But I know that I attended kind of their final presentation and it was a fantastic group. And I'm really excited for this next group since we have some lessons learned from the last time.
Marla, with your experience with working with small business in the communities, if someone came to you and said, hey, Marla, I want to start up my own business, maybe might not have much capital to their name, any advice or pointers you would suggest for that person?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that is always a plus is if you've had industry experience. So, a lot of our small businesses, our entrepreneurs that we worked with, for example, at LADC, just to give like an example, and, there were a lot of food related businesses, but it could be someone who, sort of started off in the kitchen and then they became a server and then they were a waiter and then they were front of the house and, who has kind of been around all of the elements of the business, because I think that's the hardest part to learn. You can be creative and, enthusiastic, but if you don't sort of have a sense of like the nuances of the business, like that's where, like for me, if I were even investing my own money, I would want to see that an entrepreneur, even if they hadn't had experience directly, that they had found some way to really immerse themselves in this kind of a business, learn about it, volunteer, whatever way that you could kind of get around it. Because I just think there's a lot that you wouldn't anticipate just theoretically that if you've been inside the business, you can know, like, this is a time of day when there's a rush and you just have to be ready for it. Or, so you don't want that coming at you as a surprise. Now, that being said, there were plenty of business owners that started up businesses that were in fields that they hadn't been in and they were wildly successful. But I just think nothing can substitute for experience. And so like to come into a totally new business area it's just more challenging than if you were kind of in your space where the business from really being in it and exposed to it and all the kind of fluctuations that can happen, whether it be in a day, a month, a year. That to me is a big thing. But I also think, people say like you have to find your passion. I kind of agree with that. Like I don't think it's possible to work around the clock the way that entrepreneurs do on something that you just have zero interest in. Like you have to really care about it, whether it's a problem that you really feel like you have the solution to, or just something that you feel like you're really good at or passionate about or excited about. Like that's what's going to carry you through, because I think the idea like, oh, you'll be your own boss, not really. Like all of your customers are your boss. You actually end up having many more bosses than if you were in a traditional job. So um, that would be a red flag for me. People who are just like, I don't want to work in this job anymore. I want a place where I can be my own boss and call the shots, because it's really not that. And I think everything, one thing that is in common with all of the entrepreneurs that I work with is that they were living, eating, breathing 24/7, even when they weren't physically in the business. Like it's just on your mind all the time. So it has to be something that you really care about. I feel that way about my job. I don't think I could do my job if I didn't care so much about it. I mean, probably to a fault. Like I'll wake up in the middle of the night and be like, oh, I have to remember to do this, or I have to, I just had this idea and I need to make sure that I remember it tomorrow because this would be really cool to do this, or, whatever. But I love it. And I think the successful entrepreneurs are those who have that same excitement and drive for whatever it is that they're doing. If they're making paletas or if they're, running a tech company or whatever it might be, just that it's something that is like very much like you can't get it off your mind, even if you tried.
Yeah, no, it's so true. You almost have to be obsessed about it, think about it all
Yes.
the time in order for it
Yes.
to be a success. And about the experience too, just seeing it from the commercial side of the business, which is what I do, it's so true. All the time landlords ask, okay, this is their first location as a startup, fine. Do they have experience? Is there a
Mm.
social media presence? For example,
Mhm. Yes.
the lady I was mentioning that I was helping earlier, I think now she has 1 million followers in
Oh
TikTok.
my
And
gosh.
it all started with social media. Now she has
Wow.
her first location, and now I'm also helping her with a warehouse for distribution.
Yeah.
But if you're able to show that I have
Mm.
experience, or another for restaurant client of mine, his first location, but has experience in the restaurant business as a chef,
Mhm.
back of the house. And then he started doing pop-ups. So he went to someone else. He's like, hey, can I just be here for the weekend? And then
Mm.
he grew his Instagram following. And then when he was ready to find his first brick and mortar restaurant, it was a huge success.
I love
Um,
it.
but that's how it starts. You need to
Yeah.
show them. Yes.
Absolutely. And I was just going to say, you bring up something that's so interesting now about how things are different is like, you know, the role of social media can be really pivotal for your organization. And you don't have to go anywhere for that. I mean, you can do it from your home, you can do it from behind your phone, you can do it, it doesn't really require you. You can even make sales. Here's my
Mhm.
dog here. But you can even make sales without having, built a physical store. So I think it actually makes the opportunities even bigger because there's so much less of a physical investment that you have to make. I think a while ago, or maybe when I was knocking on physical doors in the late 90s, if you were going to sell something, you needed a store. You
Mhm.
couldn't do that through your computer. And now we've made such incredible strides. Like as long as you had, like to your point, a warehouse to keep, your materials or your product, you wouldn't even really necessarily need some place that someone could walk into. You can just sell it all online. So it's exciting how the opportunity has kind of grown with technology and partially forced during COVID, but it's fascinating, and I'm sure it has impacts on your job and how it's kind of evolving. So
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. Throughout our careers, we all have setbacks or failures, you can say. Is there any one in particular that comes to mind, Marla, and said, gosh, did sort of set me back? And if so, what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you two examples. One is I'm actually in right now, which is NALCAB was part of a coalition that applied to a huge grant. Like I'm talking billions, like money that we've never seen before. It was a federal opportunity. And our coalition started small, and NALCAB was one of the founding members. And we ended up making it, we kind of were like all inclusive, like we want everyone to be a part of this. And I think, I mean, I have a lot of lessons learned from this experience, but I'll just say, I don't even really know. I'm so in it right now that I don't even really know like what the lesson is. But I think I think one thing, and this is, this could apply to anybody, as this kind of grew out of control, I started having a gut feeling like this is just not going to pan out. And ultimately, we did get an award. It was much smaller than what we had applied for, but I think actually the lesson, if I have to answer my own question now as I'm sitting through it, is like your gut is never wrong. Your gut is always right, And so I think once I started having that feeling, I should have done something about it. I should have said something about it, but I just kept pushing it down like, no, everything's going to be okay. Like it's too late to do something else. Like we're kind of so far down this road that we have to kind of just keep going with it. And in retrospect, we didn't have to keep doing it. I mean, we could have course corrected and but we were just kind of on this train that was moving. And I know I'm speaking in very abstract terms, but all to say, like your gut will always point you in the right direction. Your gut will always let you know when something's off.
Yeah.
And this was an example where I should, I've had enough experiences to know that you have to listen to your gut. And I just didn't do it. And it backfired.
So in this situation, if you would have course corrected, would things have been different, you think?
Knowing what I know now, I think they would have been. Everyone says, hindsight is 2020, but
Sure.
I do think when I started having that rumbling, I should have, I could have even had said to my team, like, something just feels like off about this. What can we do? And that's really like my leadership style is not like I have the answer. I often go to my team and will say things like, there's this situation, like, let's talk about what we could do here. Like what are the possibilities, and so that would be something that I would have done, this time last year, is said like, this really feels out of control. And there are a lot of, sort of new members of this coalition. I've never met them. And now we're like going in on this huge opportunity. And I don't know that the trust is there. Like, I just don't know them, so things like that. Like I just,
Sure.
I felt like it was maybe because there was so much at stake that I just kind of left it alone. But precisely because there was so much at stake, I should have listened to my gut.
Listen to that gut.
Yeah. Yeah. Always.
Are there any specific habits or traits you feel that have helped you, whether on your professional side or even just your personal side of things?
Yeah. I mean, my personal side is like a giant mess because I am like so career focused. I have 3 kids. They've like gone to more community events than any child should ever have to go to. And I've missed all sorts of things for, being on business trips and things like that. But on the professional side, where I do think I could give some advice, and this is relatively generic, but it is true. I mean, cliches are all true. I know myself well enough to know what I'm good at, and I know exactly what I'm bad at, and that's what I hire for, is all the things that I know I don't know how to do, or that I'm just not good at, or not my strengths. That's my team. My team is like, add us all together, we're the perfect person, but we're each bringing something to the table that the other might not have. And so all together, it's perfection. But, if you broke us all up, it probably wouldn't go too far. But know thyself, know what you're good at, and then don't try to fake what you aren't what you're just not able to do. Like I'm, my calendar, like I mean, that's why I have an assistant, but I literally like wake up and I'm just like, where am I going today? Where am I supposed to be? Am I traveling? Am I not? I'm just disorganized in that way, but I have people around me who are, making sure everything's under control. So otherwise I'd be a lost cause.
Speaking of your team at NALCAB, how does that look?
So, well, it's interesting because our office is, so the organization was founded in San Antonio in Texas, because the founding CEO lived there, and it just made sense. And also there was sort of a lot of the beginnings of our organization that had to do with kind of the border and that sort of thing. So the location, that it was built in was Texas. But I sit in DC. When I started, it was during, fully remote times. But now my direct team is split between our DC office and our Texas office. So, my very closest right hand is in San Antonio, sort of the number two of the organization. And so that's different, like I had never had anything like that, but really everyone is bringing a different skill set. Most of them, it has to do with like what their role is what their strength is. But it's a fantastic team, some of which I inherited and some of which I hired, and it's just been amazing.
That's great.
Yeah.
What's your biggest challenge with your role at NALCAB today?
My biggest challenge, gosh, I have a really hard time saying no to opportunities. So I think my team is very helpful in like bringing me down to earth. Like there's no possible way we can do these 30 things. So like, let's narrow it down and decide what we're going to do. I think that's probably one of my biggest challenges. That's sort of like what sticks out the most, I think, is just kind of like, it's part of this obsession, and the passion is that you're just, full of like, oh, we could do this or we could do that, or we could, and then just recognizing that there are constraints, like enough people or enough money or, to do all those things. But we just put together a strategic plan so that will give us a good fence around everything that we, should be aiming at. And it will be very helpful to me to just kind of stay centered.
But in my opinion, I think that's great. I think it's better to have a leader who's sort of the visionary or dreams, and then you have a team or someone else who sort of brings it down to reality and say, "Look,
Yeah.
this is what we can do." That's needed in an
Yes,
organization.
yes. But what
Yes.
I will say is my team is not like their immediate isn't like, oh, we could never do that. Like they also get very excited, and then I think we balance each other out on the team because they're, sort of more realistic and more idealistic, and then mix it together and it becomes kind of like what can actually happen in a day or a week or a month or a year.
Yeah, that's great. Coming to an end here soon.
Yeah.
What do you know now that you wish you would have known at the start of your career?
Um, the term work-life balance, I just don't think that's even a thing. Like I just posted actually on Mother's Day that like you're either fully focused on work or fully focused on your family, and then sometimes like multitasking the two sides, but mostly it's kind of like you're all in at work or you're all in at the family. And um, I think I probably would have given myself a little bit more space to prioritize my family, honestly. At least in the beginning, particularly at LEDC, I have to say, like that was a very all-consuming job. And I think I could have not done every single thing that I did, not shown up every single place that I showed up, or, um, I think that also like comes with trying to dial down like people pleasing, so if you have a funder who wants you to come to an event, or, a council member who wants you to show up, and it's very hard to say no to those things. But I think in the balance, like I probably could have done a better job of just kind of having a boundary and being like, you know what, no, like this weekend I can't, or, whatever. And I definitely think I've gotten better at that.
Yeah, that's tough. You mentioned you have three children, and you said I
Yeah.
think your oldest just graduated from BCC recently.
So he graduated 2 years ago. He's at
Oh, okay.
University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and my middle, sorry, just finished his studies. He's in exams at St. John's, and he's going to go to college next year in Massachusetts at UMass. So super excited about that. And then I have a daughter who is in 6th grade. So I've got college, high school, middle school.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
It's very interesting you said that. And, a while back, I was more just go, 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 go. And I still have that. But
yeah,
I don't know, through the years, I've experienced that, it's nice to take a break and just maybe
yeah.
spend. I have three boys myself.
Oh
Um,
wow.
yeah, and they're just a little younger. I don't have,
Yeah.
my oldest is in middle school right now.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's
Um,
exciting.
yeah, so yesterday I went with my middle one, who's a fourth grader. we took a field trip with this fourth grade class to Annapolis to go visit the capital of
Oh,
Maryland.
nice.
And we had a nice little tour. Actually, I think I posted it on LinkedIn today. And on the ride back home on the school bus, I'm like, Adam, so what was your favorite part of the trip? And he's like, Papa, being with you.
Oh my
And
gosh, my
and
heart.
I was like, me too.
Yeah. Oh, that's so
Yeah.
sweet. I love that. I absolutely
Yeah.
love that. And I will say, I know we're coming to a close, but I think that was the biggest gift for me of COVID is, we have a hybrid schedule coming in and out of the office, but like I was never home when my kids got home from school. And in the past, however many years, 4 years, like I've been here most days when they come home from school. And even if I'm working, even if I'm on a call, I'm here. And that has been like so amazing for me and for them,
Yeah.
just to have like that interaction before it's like dinner and bath and going to bed and just sort of being on a hamster wheel. So I am very grateful to the COVID time for giving us more flexibility in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I know you're busy, especially, with running the organization with the three children, but what do you like to do in your free time for fun when you have some free time available?
Yeah. So I live right by Rock Creek Park, so I like to dip myself in there as much as I can. I love being in the trees and taking walks down there. So that's probably like my number one thing. And then another thing that I love to do is I guess you would call it like flipping. I've done two so far. So I purchased a property and like renovated it and I love decorating. Like that's going to be my second career. You can interview me when I'm a stager or something like for homes. Because I love that. I love, having the vision of what it's going to look like and then making it come to life. So yeah,
Oh,
I'm
I
in
didn't
the
know that. That's nice. So is it more the
yeah.
design part of it, Marla? Because, with flipping, I can, there's the contracts you deal with and the
Yeah.
timelines and all this other stuff,
Yes.
you
So it's
know?
kind of a slow flip. So the first place that I got was not intended to be a flip. I bought a place in West Virginia and had it, most of it was cosmetic, but there was some sort of structural and then kind of decorated and made it like exactly how I wanted to be. And then I was finding that I just wasn't getting down there as much. Like when it was COVID time, I actually would work from there and like bring my kids down there and all that. But um, I I wish I could say this was like that I knew it was going to pan out this way, but I basically bought it at the very bottom of the market, like before people were buying second homes during COVID. So I bought it like
Mm,
in May of COVID,
okay.
May of 2020, and then I sold it like at the peak. Like I've already seen it go down the
Oh,
exact amount.
wow.
So I
Okay.
sold it at the peak. I say that's how I was able to pay for my son's college. And then I took a little bit of what I made off of that and put it in a different, much smaller, different kind of thing.
Hmm.
That has been again like a slow, so it's not like I'm working
Okay.
against a 6-month deadline because part of it is I use it with my kids. So it's like
Got it.
it
Okay.
has some utility in the meantime. And then I'm hoping like there'll be a point where it's like, okay, now's the time to sell. And then I'll do that. But really the most fun that I have with it is just like sort of having this idea in my head of how it's gonna look and be, and then like making it be that.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
nice. Look at that.
Yeah. It's super fun. I love it. I'll send you some before and afters.
You have to
Yeah.
post it.
I will. I will. Thank you. Good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So what does the future look like for you in NALCAB? What are you most excited about for the next couple of years?
Yeah, something that's a huge challenge, but that I'm also really excited about is we're doing a lot of work with our members in helping them to secure large federal contracts. And if we are successful in that, which I'm hopeful that we will be, that will create, really reliable and sort of large scale income for a lot of our members. And, you know, interestingly, maybe not surprisingly, a lot of the same kind of gaps that exist in our communities exist in our sector. So, a lot of our organizations aren't tapped into the same, big corporate funders. And that's part of what we do too, is like we're trying to bridge, building more relationships within our networks and the funders, and but it's very often that smaller, lower resourced, Latino-led organizations just are not getting the same kind of funding as the bigger, higher resourced, white-led. In the example that I gave you of kind of like my biggest setback that I'm in right now, is a multi-billion-dollar federal opportunity, and the 3 top awardees are white-led coalitions. And then there was not one coalition led by a BIPOC coalition that got $1 billion or more. And so, am I surprised? Not necessarily. Am I disappointed? I'm crushed, And so we see that, and I really want it, like the same way that we're trying to, in the community, bridge the racial wealth gap. There is a gap in our sector, and I want to bridge that. I want our organizations to have the same opportunities that all organizations have, because they're doing incredible work. I mean, they are doing unbelievable work with limited resources, and they really, like, the only cap on what they can do and how they can scale and the impact that they can have is having more resources. So anything we can do to change that will have a huge ripple effect in the communities where they are, because they have the talent. They just need the resources.
Yeah, that's great. Is there someone listening to this what's the best way they want to learn more about you and NALCAB?
Yeah, you can go to www.nalcab.org is our website. And I'm on LinkedIn. If anyone, wants to follow, you can see sort of most of what I post about is about NALCAB. So that's a great way to keep up with what we're doing. And we also are on all social channels. So if you just searched, either NALCAB or our full name, National Association for Latino Community Asset Builders, you will find us on Facebook, Instagram, again, LinkedIn. We're even on Twitter, or X or whatever it's called now. So yeah, please find us.
Marla, thank you so much for coming on the show
today.
Thank
you, Otto. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure was all mine.
Thanks a million. Okay,
Bye.
Take care. Have a good rest of the day.